we're at the point now where I can do some of the pot selection for this larch here. First thing I want to do is be able to see the roots, to see how far down I think I can cut off, see how far up I'm going to be cutting off certain roots, see if there's any sort of deadwood features that I can make. And to do that, I'm actually going to remove some of this plastic pot. I just use any old saw that I have. This one was from the dollar store about 15 years ago. I have to rebend it every now and then, but hey, it works. Now these collars that I cut off at the top of these actually are pretty good for doing something like a ground layer on a plant that you want to raise the roots on it. You know, something that has too long of a lower trunk or something like that. You can use this as is by wrapping it around the base of that tree, filling it in with soil, doing the air layer technique, but just down low. You could drill a ton of holes in these and make it work really well. It's very easy to slip around a trunk like that. So I do have a bunch of these lying around, and when I get to my ground layers, these will probably be used. I definitely recommend drilling a ton of holes in this though. Otherwise you could use something like a piece of mesh. So after I've had that done, I also want to remove some of the soil from the top of this. This is a very sandy soil that this is planted in. When I say very sandy, it's probably 80% straight up fine sand. Which it's done okay growing in. It's got a decent amount of roots in there. All I'm doing basically is just removing enough where I can see where any thick roots are. See if any of these thin roots are really needed up high or not. It also allows me to place pots up next to it and see which pots I think look really good with the base of this tree. At the same time, I'm also removing any sort of weeds that are growing on the top. And for around here, also moss. Base of this tree is pretty good. I'm not going to worry about creating the perfect root base, otherwise known as nabari. Actually just going to make it where I can get the depth that I want, really is what I'm focusing on. What I will try to figure out is if there's any crossing roots that I want to take care of. Come back in just a few and I'll have this all cleaned up and we'll start looking at some pots. And now we're going to be selecting a container to really bring about the wild look of this tree. So rather windswept looking, and I like to turn my trees around quite a bit, so I'm probably going to be going for a round. Let's start looking at some options here real quick. This one is a pretty large pot by Sam Miller. It's got a bit of a patinaed look to it. It looks like it's been around for a while. It's a ceramic container, and one of the things I like about Sam's pots, one of many things, I like this. He makes a pot that's pretty thin. This is actually pretty lightweight for the size of it, and it's just fun for me to make that ringing sound. So anyways, this pot is plenty large enough to fit all of the roots that this tree has. As you can see, it's a much bigger pot width-wise than this tree is. So I won't have to really constrict the roots too much to fit it in it. Chances are below the soil line of this pot, the roots are probably pretty fine, just based on what I've seen from the trunk base so far. I'll be able to really spread the roots out in a container this size. Color's not too bad. Size is big. But this tree in foliage will also look rather large, a lot of fluffy foliage on it. So this is definitely a good option for a first pot for this tree to transition from the big nursery container into bonsai container culture. I don't believe this has been repotted for probably at least 10 years. So this could be a good pot for it. I have a couple of other options. This one by Anthony Jenkins of Jenkins Family Pottery. Now, I did the ring sound on that previous pot, and this one also has some ring. Slightly different ring. Now, the ring doesn't necessarily mean that the pot is good or bad. It just is something that happens when you hold a bell-shaped container that is able to have sound resonate when you tap it. And this one, being a nice round shape, really resonates really nicely. So sometimes when you have a pot like this that you expect to have a ring to it and it has a dull sound or just a sound that doesn't sound like it's a continuous resonation, that could mean that there is either something in the structure of the pot that doesn't allow the sound to travel around, such as rocky areas or something like that. Maybe a lot of texture that can happen. Sometimes that can mean there's a crack in the pot. So it's one of my tests to see if a pot is sound, as they say. All right, going back to this pot by Tony. So this one has a really nice rocky, barky type texture to it. It also has a bit of the gold sort of look here, and this tree also has bright gold fall color. So that would be a really neat echo of the tree onto the pot. I really like the size and form of this pot with this tree. Very strong option for this tree. The colors, you know, it's kind of a brown color compared to the rest of this tree. So the gold part of it I like. The brown I probably will like. It's got that very unglazed bonsai pot look to it, so it's easy to see. It's not something that you'd have to like retrain your mind on what you're looking for in a bonsai pot. So in that way, it's somewhat expected, but the gold is kind of unexpected. That would make it really nice to look at and would kind of challenge you to look a little bit longer. So really good option here. The depth is a little bit shallow. Probably have to plant this a little bit high to begin with. Also, I haven't cracked this pot open, the nursery pot, really to see where we're at with roots. So I'm not sure I can make this one work, but I'd like to try to make that work. Let's move on to a couple of other choices. This one is by Qingwen Arts. This one is a little bit different shape than that last one. A little less formal, much more like a bowl sort of shape. Couple of things that are different between this and the last one is it is just a bit smaller looking based on the profile. It looks taller, but it's not really very much taller, but it does look a little bit smaller because it doesn't have the rim protrusion on it. What it does have is a different color. It has some mossy green sort of colors on it, kind of like oxidized copper, which on the inside you can see that pattern a little bit better. That'll of course be covered by soil, but that is going on all of the outside texture of this pot. The rim of the pot has a very barky looking texture, and I do like it a lot. It definitely has the appearance of depth for this tree. It's just barely smaller than the width of the nursery pot that this is in. It's a really interesting look for it. This tree also does have some moss that's growing on it that I haven't quite picked all the way off, and some of that's a similar color to it. It's a strong option. I'll have to say that the previous one by Tony, I do like a little bit more just looking at it without it being under the tree. So we'll see. Let's move on to another one. Very different looking pot. This one from Red Tail Pottery. And this one is a deconstructed oval, I guess. It's just a freeform pot. So the pots that I usually go for allow me to turn a tree around and look at it from different angles and see different things. And this one definitely has, as you turn it, different looks as we go around. It actually has some broken looking sections on some of these points here that make it look like it's just been ripped apart. And this tree also has had a little bit of that same sort of function up here at the top, that some force has ripped apart of this tree. So I really like how that matches this pot. The pot stands out quite a bit with that color. It also stands out quite a bit with the interesting undulations on it, which the tree doesn't have quite those undulations other than right here at the top. The tree is fairly swooping straight lines. So this pot has some of those, and then it has some tear outs, which this tree also has. I really like this pot for that. It's very interesting to me, and also one thing I really like is that with the elongation of this branch, I also have an elongated pot which can go with that. So it's a very strong option. It'd be interesting to orient the pot with the root structure and try to figure out which way makes the most sense for planting it in. I won't be looking for a front of this pot as is traditionally known for bonsai terms. I like to be able to spin a tree around, so this pot would spin around as I go also. And so on display, you could be looking at it just like this, and actually even possibly from down below as if you were hiking up a mountainside. You could also be looking at it from the top side as if you were looking down off of the side of a road. This pot really makes it interesting for that. Very, very strong option. And I have one more that is a different look than the previous pots. We're kind of going more and more away from a traditional style bonsai pot. So we'll show that next one in just a second. Last one is this slab from Sam Miller, also this slab. And this one, it could be interesting to actually turn it over, upside down, and plant the larch up on the top of this, which will have it have that more mounded feel. But because this is the first planting and the roots are not shallow, my option is pretty much to have it with the scoop facing up. It's a large slab compared to the other pots, and that's good because then I can mound some soil up. One thing I would really be interested to see is where the tree looks good on it. Traditionally, in a pot like this, you would plant the tree-ish right about here, and then this long sweeping branch actually fits really well with the shape of this pot that comes out to a point here. And that would be something that's a very front-facing sort of orientation when you look at it. One thing I may consider with this, because this end has a little bit of a cupping up direction, I could easily mound the soil a little bit higher on this side and have the soil slope down as it goes towards a side-oriented tree placement. So it will be a taller, maybe a bunch of rocks and things up here, and then down on that. If I got really interested in making that work, I could also do something like that. I would have to create some sort of apparatus to keep this at an angle. I mean, that would be really interesting, but for now I just want to do it something pretty simple. I like that I can spread the roots out on this pot quite a bit. It doesn't have a lot of depth, so I may not be able to use this as an option if the tree has a lot of thick roots that I need to keep for a while longer underneath it. But it's an option, and it's really neat looking. Alright, now here is the larch planted into this pot. I quite like it. I basically just kind of smoothed the soil out once I got it on there. I was able to put this root over the edge of it. That'll need a little bit more time to be able to get that white color. Also, this root that was pointed out exactly the opposite side, I'm going to be working on that a little bit more too. Not quite liking it the way it is. But yeah, I like that this is a nice flat surface for this tree. But I think we might be able to do a little bit better with this. I have some rocks laying around. I think I'm going to put some rocks on the top of this and see what I think of that. Give me another second. Alright, there it is in the pot with some rocks. You know what, you can't really tell much from a distance, so I'll probably scoot you a little closer here in a second. But what it does do is it creates some height differences on this pot, so it's not just a flat plane. As this starts to grow some moss and stuff like that, I'm going to have to keep an eye on it because this is supposed to be up in the mountains. So instead of moss, like in a lowland area, I might need to put some other sort of plantings on this. But it will start to get a little bit more weathered as it goes through the year coming up. But I think I do like this pot. The styling of the tree right now, it's okay. It's very gently styled. Basically all I've done really is just some gentle direction with some wire, pulling branches here and there. Some of them, maybe it makes more sense to have a slightly different angle. Say maybe this long one might make more sense to be drooping down a little bit further. And if that's the case, I'll do that adjustment some other time. For now, I do really like that it has a very wild look. It doesn't look much like a bonsai to me. It looks more like a tree, which that's what I'm kind of trying to go for in my bonsai styling quite a bit more. So I'll have some that are very much bonsai with the tiered branches and the domed tops, but this one won't be one of those. All right, there is the base of this. See, pretty close, that detail on the pot, very interesting looking. I wish I had a little bit more of a root for this right here. It's pretty thin as it is, but it's still just enough to have this be an interesting point of that. I like how this rough rock looks like something that this tree may be found in. It's a very rough tree. These bark plates, as you can see right here, those are pretty well attached to the tree. I was very careful when I was repotting this not to damage these little bark plates. Thanks y'all for tuning in today. This is the end of the series for this larch. A lot of fun. I do have another larch coming up pretty soon too. If you are interested in that, let me know and I'll get to that larch a little sooner than later. Plus I have a whole bunch of other plants. I definitely have a lot more deciduous, and I have a couple of really interesting Canadian hemlocks that I'd like to work with. All of it is nursery stock, so no collected stuff out of that batch. But I do have several really young collected Western red cedars, and I will have some more collected hawthorns I'm going to be working with. Thanks for sticking around with me today. I'm Jared. You're on Bonsai Echo. See you next time.